Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first story is titled Malicious Compliance. I used to be a suit for a large corporation and was in charge of a visitor center in the middle of nowhere, 1 hour away from the company's HQ. The visitor center was attached to a site where technology was prototyped or used for the first time, so many managers working in the same industry came by, had a tour and maybe some meetings with other suits from HQ. One of my tasks was to create the work plans for the other 25 tour guides. These were mostly smart students in their early 20s, doing this as a temp job 1 or 2 days a week. Most of them were trilingual, German, English plus X, and our guests were in awe when someone could do the tour in their native language like Russian, Hindi, Korean or Norwegian. Work was not too hard if you liked talking, pay was very good, €20 per hour plus commuting expense, and the guests were pleasant professionals, other students or people from our company. On a normal day, there were 7 to 10 guides and each did 4 to 5 tours. In my culture, gifts are not a big deal. You get something on your birthday and on Christmas and maybe bring some flowers when you visit your mother, but that's usually it. Since we had many international guests, I quickly learned that in many countries it seems to be normal to bring a really nice gift if you're a guest. So we trained all guides to properly handle this and not to offend anyone. Since most of our tour guests were from abroad, every tour guide would take at least 1 or 2 gifts home daily, ranging from chocolate to electronic gadgets or booze. We usually shared everything among the guides, but if you did the tour you had dibs if you really wanted the bottle of whiskey. The only unspoken rule was not to sell it. Some groups were so happy with the tour that they even sent a thank you package to one of the guides. So over the course of 2 years we had many thousand groups and even had a space in our storage for the gifts that nobody wanted. We called it the kitschkist, tacky stuff box. Then the company ducked up during the quarterly fiscal reports. The shareholders were angry and so they did what every other Fortune 500 company does, bull-crap measures to get the board off your back. One of these measures were a program to ensure compliance. So someone was appointed CCO, Chief Compliance Officer, and in charge of making sure there is no bribery going on. A few weeks later every single employee received 60 pages of legal gibberish explaining what compliance means and what to do and what not. I actually read that contract before signing, because my tour guide temps would be spared to sign it if I took the responsibility. Unfortunately it also said something like, gifts above estimated value of €20 cannot be accepted. If you cannot guess the value they must also not be accepted. So I wrote to the compliance officer, told him about the visitor center and explained that it would be very rude to refuse a little gift from a Japanese guest. I just did everything by the books and asked for a suggestion what to do. He called me and was pretty angry that we had accepted all these gifts over the years but still had no clue that it can be offensive to refuse a gift. He said he will revise the compliance document and send me a new one. The new document said that all gifts of uncertain value or above €20 must be sent to the compliance officer. They will do a lottery and fairly give it to someone at HQ. I signed the new compliance guidelines and plotted my revenge. Of course my team was sad that the daily gifts were not to be taken home anymore, but they also knew that the CCO would tightly monitor our behavior because we were a potentially easy target. So we Germaned up and did everything in the formally most correct way. We ordered a few hundred boxes and package stamps, company expenses, and started to send 20 to 30 boxes to the CCO's office. Daily. We used the different tour guide names and addresses as senders and also used the crap from the kitschkist. After 3 weeks I received another angry call from the CCO's assistant. He was abroad for the time with his boss and came back to a pile of boxes. I stated that it was exactly as he wanted it and if he had a better idea he should let me know. He suggested we should just store them somewhere and send them by bulk every month. 4 weeks later we did just that and also added an inventory list of every single item. Then my boss did me a favor, went on the company intranet forums and asked what will happen to all these gifts, since the process seems pretty intransparent to him and that this is exactly the opposite of compliance. This produces so many replies that they felt pushed to make an official statement on the intranet and actually held this ducking tombola which the CCO's office had to organize. This got the attention from the advisory board and they asked the CCO if he had nothing better to do than to organize gift lotteries. Half a year later the guy was fired. We kept the gifts from this point on. Nobody asked ever again. The visitor center shut down in 2013 because the project ended. The next story is titled, "Just Roll the Kegs to the Cellar." So this was a few years back working in a very quiet bar in Edinburgh. I arrived for my shift and immediately noticed that the delivery hadn't been put away by the morning staff. It was quite a large delivery of around 10–15 case of wines and spirits and 3 or 4 kegs for the cellar. Being new there and not one to grumble, outwardly at least, I set about putting away all the stock that had arrived. Unlike most bars, the wines and spirits were kept upstairs in the restaurant rather than in the cellar, so I decided to unpack all of those boxes away in the cage, and by the time I have finished the morning staff had left and I was on my own for an hour before the evening manager arrived. I decide my best course of action is to wait for them to arrive to help me carry the kegs down the flight of stairs that led to the cellar. Logical, right? Well, the manager arrives and comments that the delivery should have been put away and questions why I haven't done it as it's cluttering up the venue. I then informed him that it had been sat there for at least 3 hours by the time I had arrived and that I'd already put everything else away and was just waiting for some assistance to carry the kegs down the stairs. He told me just to roll them down the stairs. Now, knowing that he meant for me to hold them and bump them down one step at a time, hurting my back in the process, I decided to follow what he said to the letter. I positioned myself at the top of the stairs, lined the barrels up one by one and just pushed them off the top step, letting them clatter down the stairs and arriving at the bottom before rolling them down the corridor into the cellar. He wasn't best pleased to say the least, but he did tell me to roll them down the stairs. The next story is titled, "Marine Gets Punished, Gets 2 Weeks Off All Duties." 20 years ago I was in the Marine Corps. While going through schooling for my MOS, basically job training, I was between schools. As such, the command at the school didn't know what to do with me for nearly 3 months. One day during this period, a complete $1 hole of a staff NCO, we'll call him SSGT Smalls, noticed that I was just sitting around doing nothing, which is what most people in my situation end up doing during periods like this. Naturally, SSGT Smalls was not pleased with this, and he came up with a plan: use me to do all the carp work cleaning on the base. SSGT Smalls, Marine. Me, yes SSGT? SSGT Smalls, why aren't you doing any work? Me, I am waiting between schools ATM SSGT. There is nothing for me to be doing. SSGT Smalls, that's no excuse. A Marine should always look busy. I want you to go outside and clean the plaques on the barracks until they shine. You are to do nothing else until you are finished, understand? Me, sighing inwardly, yes SSGT. I then proceed to get the cleaning equipment, brasso and a rag, grab a chair and begin to get to work. I find it to be very nice outside, a cool breeze, stationed near the coast, and people rarely come out here other than for formation. The plaques are located between 2 barracks and generally out of sight. Suddenly I remember the SSGT's exact words. Until they shine. And, do nothing else until you are finished. Cue plan for malicious compliance. Having finished polishing one of the plaques, I decide to take a break and go find my sergeant. She had been in the room when SSGT Smalls gave the order. I confirm with her what the SSGT's order was, and just what I would be able to avoid doing due to his order. She looked at me confused for a moment, and asked me to clarify. I did so, including my plan, and my situation. She laughed, and said, as long as you are present for formation and only do the task while on working hours, she will back me up. I dropped off the cleaning equipment I had been using, and instead grabbed some needles and toothpicks. I then proceeded outside and got to work, painstakingly picking clean every speck of oxidation, rust, from the plaques. 15 minutes go by. An hour. 2 hours. SSGT Smalls comes out, my sergeant in tow, along with the MSGT. SSGT Smalls, Marine. I ordered you to report. He pauses for a second, seeing me at work, still on the first of the 5 plaques. WTH are you doing? Me, I am cleaning the plaques as you ordered SSGT. SSGT Smalls, with toothpicks, he stammers. Me, yes SSGT. SSGT Smalls, sighs, apparently thinking I had misunderstood his order as I was still a lowly private. I'll go get you the brasso. He turns to leave. Me, looking at my sergeant for confirmation, SSGT, the Brasso won't clean these to your specifications, and as per your orders I am allowed to do nothing else until these plaques shine. The MSGT raises an eyebrow, looking confused. I learn later the MSGT was pulled out here as SSGT Smalls was going to claim I was being lazy, disobeying orders, and was there to NJP me. He looks to the sergeant, who confirms exactly what the SSGT's orders were, word for word. MSGT then approaches and requests that I stand aside. He examines my work so far. At this point I should note, these plaques were old, about 8 inches by 2 feet each, and made of copper. For those who don't know, copper oxidizes fairly quickly when exposed to sea air, as mentioned before we were on the coast, which gave the plaques a mucky green color. The about 7% I had gotten done in those 2 hours? A stark copper orange that was actively reflecting the light. MSGT nodded to me, turned to the SSGT and said, "He is following your orders, to the letter I might add. Nobody is to interfere with his cleaning until he is done." SSGT Smalls looks flabbergasted, tries to claim that I am needed elsewhere, probably wants me for some other carpy job, but the MSGT shuts him down. This is now an order from him. Basically meaning nobody other than an officer can now pull me away from this duty, without conferring with him first. End result? 2 weeks of calm, if painstaking, work outside, nobody to interrupt me, and the occasional view of SSGT Smalls glaring at me as he walks by. There were a few people who stopped by in the early days questioning what I was doing. They accepted that I was just following orders, my response to any such questions given, and if they needed me for something, to talk to the MSGT first. Oh, the plaques? They were picked clean, not a speck of oxidation remained. 2 days after I finished, there was an inspection by the base commander. He was amazed at how clean the plaques were, that he could actually see his reflection in them. Our barracks was commended on our attention to detail and cleanliness. While I didn't get a commendation by name, this was more than enough for me as I could see SSGT Smalls fuming while the base commander spoke. The next day I shipped out to my next school. Best 2-week detail I ever had. The next story is titled, "Brothers-in-law doesn't take advice, tangles rope around his boat's propeller." So my brother-in-law recently got a new boat and has been very excited to show it off to all his family and friends. He's the type of guy who has an ego, oftentimes it's harmless, and since he's seen as the successful one it's accepted. Since I'm the youngest of the group, 29F, my opinion and knowledge is not taken as seriously. Whatever, no big deal. Anyway, my Bill was getting his boat ready, and since this was maybe his 7th time taking it out, he thinks he's an expert. Prior leaving the shore he had the intertube tied to the back of the boat. As someone who went boating a lot as a kid I said, "Hey, shouldn't we pull in the tube so it doesn't get tangled?" Bill says, "No, it will just pull along the back when we get out there." His boat his way, so I sit back and watch. Well, who would have thought the rope to the intertube gets tangled around the boat's propeller, and now we're dead in the water just a few feet offshore. There's Bill, 2 women, 2 babies, 1 child, and me on the boat. In addition, my husband's on a jet ski and Bill's male best friend is on the 2nd jet ski. Needless to say, the women on the boat and men on the jet skis can't do too much, so it's me and Bill trying to fix the situation. On top of that, high wind is pushing us into the weeds and into the neighbor's dock. So I try untangling the rope, but not strong enough. I tell Bill, "Hey, if you pull the rope this way it will come off." He says, "Nope, we gotta cut it." Again, his boat, his way. His male best friend jumps off the jet ski to assess the situation and says, "Yeah, no need to cut the rope," in which Bill now agrees this is best course of action. At this point I jump on the neighbor's dock to prevent the boat from smashing into the side. After a few minutes, the rope is free and boat is good to go. Well, it gets better. Since we were in the weeds, male best friend starts the jet ski and sucks up debris from the lake, essentially stalling the engine. Best part, I'm on the boat drinking wine watching this unfold in the distance, thinking this could have been prevented. So yeah, they had to park the jet ski on shore. We're now ready for our voyage with the boat and 1 jet ski. After about an hour or so, we drop anchor in a cove, and moments later male best friend flips the jet ski, the key hooked to his jacket comes off, and now the key is lost. At this point Bill has accepted the key is gone and we'll need to tow the jet ski. He is clearly frustrated, all things considered. You can probably guess by now I found the key floating about 8 minutes later and we were on our way home. In the end nothing was ever said of the whole ordeal, but I knew if he had let go of his ego, taken my common sense advice, then maybe the voyage wouldn't have been so disastrous. The next story is titled That One Right There. I've written before about my adventures, in years gone by, working in a mall pretzel place and the wonderfully terrible people, Karens, I came across, but here's another tiny malicious compliance, petty revenge. It's a long exposition on this one, so strap in. We used to sell pretzel bites, little soft bites served in a cup, and these were a favorite of customers. You typically got more than a normal pretzels for only slightly more cost. Ideal for sharing between 2 kids or friends. However, we began getting complaints that the cup wasn't full enough, or the bites were too small. Over and over again people would come back whining how they didn't get enough or the bites were too small. We typically could fit around 10 to 12 pretzel bites in a cup when they were proper sized, and sometimes larger ones or smaller bites would make the cups look more or less full. Usually it was the same people causing problems. At the mall twice a week, same exact time, with kid in tow for whatever and always complaining. We had a pretty clear, we will only replace it if something is actually wrong on our part policy, and I especially loved reminding customers that if they chose the cup or pretzel, it's on them. This part always made me laugh because we'd have a line around the block and some kids screaming, "I want that cup, not that one, the big one in the back." And mommy or daddy always demanded that one, despite me trying to explain it was not full, it was older and intended, or samples, etc. Naturally they returned a few minutes later to try and complain, to which I politely responded, "But that's the one you insisted on having." Anyway, my manager was sick and tired of hearing all this CRPA. It was around the typical, "here comes the annoying needs of bratty kids and parents" time. So he asked our cook to make the largest, fluffiest, softest looking bites possible. They were so large we could barely fit 4 in the cup. These suckers were beautiful. It looked like fresh, tear-apart bread, gleaming and drenched in butter. Because the sides weren't dark brown, they soaked up a ton of butter. I'm talking you can squeeze an Oz out of those suckers. So the trap was laid. Along comes yet another identically whiny kid and parents in tow. Kid sees the cup in the back, demands it. I politely explain it's intended for samples because there's not very many bites in the cup. Mum yells at me demanding said cup. I comply. 2 minutes later, here comes angry mommy and upset kid. This cup wasn't full, I demand another one. My lovely manger steps in, "Ma'am, you were informed this cup wasn't full and insisted upon it despite my employee's best intentions. I can't do that. You got exactly what you asked for." This repeated for 1 week until we'd cycled through all the obnoxious people, and suddenly we have nicer customers, parents telling their bratty kids, "Let the lady decide, she'll get you the best cup," and a very polite thank you. Hands down, thank Manger saved us for a few months from horrible customer service abuse. The next story is titled Treats in Vietnam. My scoutmaster was a very dedicated and successful leader for our troop. He was extremely creative, having traveled extensively doing woodworking and leatherwood in his earlier years, and was an avid outdoorsman. We scouts were the beneficiaries of his great experiences, and he shared these skills with us. He was a huge influence in my life and a great mentor to us. He was also a Vietnam vet with plenty of stories he would tell us around the campfire. This was his best story. He is gone now, sadly, but this is a great memory of him. For this story we will call him MJ. MJ was a Marine stationed at some firebase in the middle of the Vietnam jungle during the war. He happened to meet another Marine in passing who received mail in the shape of a tube, and in that tube were large individually wrapped sourdough pretzels. The other Marine shared his pretzels with MJ, and they had a conversation about how those pretzels had gotten to a firebase in the middle of the Vietnam jungle. Turns out, the guy's mother worked at the pretzel factory, and she had sent it as a care package to her son. MJ had an idea, and asked if he thought she would send him some of his own pretzels if he wrote her and included some money. The note went something like, "I'm a Marine and I met your son here in Vietnam, and it has been so long since I've had a XXX brand pretzel, I would love it if you could send me some also, enclosed is some cash to cover the costs, etc." Sure enough, weeks later a tube arrived for MJ loaded with pretzels and a note, "So happy to know you met my son, happy to pass along these pretzels for you to enjoy, thank you for your service, etc., and his money was returned in the tube. Sweet. Well, that was nice, but it set MJ's mind to thinking. In addition to eating the pretzels, he could use them to trade around camp for other things he wanted. Using the same idea, what else could be sent to the middle of the jungle? A plan was hatched. He started a letter-writing campaign, first one and then another, and eventually sent a similar note to anywhere he could get an address for with a little cash inside. "I'm a Marine in Vietnam, it's been so long since I had a..." Each time he sent a letter, after few weeks a wonderful thing happened. MJ would get a package with goodies, his cash back, and a note from a stranger thanking him for his service, happy to bring a little joy to someone. Nuts, chips, Hershey bars, candy, treats, anything edible, desirable and tradable in the middle of a jungle. A huge variety of items poured in, the letter-writing campaign becoming a huge deal. Packages continued to come in, so much so that the CO was really getting annoyed at all of the stuff addressed to MJ. He was pissed at his success, but was surely benefiting occasionally from the bounty. Months later, a helicopter landed with a delivery for MJ, and the CO called for MJ and his buddies to get their butts up to the pad and unload whatever it was. The CO was pretty fed up by this time with all of this monkey business. 4 large wooden crates were offloaded from the chopper, and MJ, his mates, and the CO cracked them open. Inside, in the middle of the sweltering Vietnam jungle, packed in dry ice, were several large tubs of ice cream. Enough for a ton of guys, which they ate heartily. That was enough for the CO, and while he ate his fair share, he told MJ that any more deliveries like that were to be discouraged and would be confiscated. No more requests for crap. Yes, sir. In compliance with the order, MJ ceased writing companies. Obviously MJ's little campaign grew as his dreams did, and there were still letters he had written, floating out in the world. With nothing to lose, he had written any company he could with his same story. A truck arrived one day at the firebase with another delivery addressed to MJ, and it was immediately confiscated. On that truck, in the middle of that jungle, was a full pallet of American beer. Over 1,400 cans of beer. It was the pinnacle of his writing campaign. The order was given that it be shipped out, but MJ was not going to be denied his prize. MJ's foxhole was near a turn along the dusty road leaving the base, and through a negotiation with the truck crew for some of the spoils, the crew dumped that pallet of beer out the back of the truck without stopping when they reached the turn. MJ and his foxhole partner scrambled out into the blinding and choking dust and shoveled the beer off the road, just beating the next truck rumbling by. A pallet of beer, that probably shouldn't have ever been there, literally fell off the truck. No one was the wiser. In the middle of a war, in a hot hellhole of a jungle. They lived like kings. The next story is titled, "You Want Us to Wear Our Dress Uniforms All Day? We Can Do That." To set the stage, I'm in the Air Force, and work in communications, specifically I work with radios. I'm part of a very normal, quiet squadron that is on a very normal, quiet base. My base doesn't have fighter jets or special operations or anything like that. The squadron was the epitome of the stereotype about the Air Force being more of a corporation than the military. With that atmosphere comes a certain amount of nonsensical decisions that get made, and one of which was made by my commander at the time. He wasn't a bad guy by any means, but also wasn't an ultra-Chad maverick from Top Gun type. He fit in well with the atmosphere of the squadron and the base, and most of the time, all was well. One day word comes down that we are to show up in our dress blues on Monday for an inspection, and then wear them all day to increase morale. This morale-increasing event would then continue weekly until further notice. For those of you who have never been in the military, a dress uniform is a massive headache. While the Air Force's is much more akin to a standard suit with some ribbons and rank insignia sewn on and with a funny hat, it was still expected that your tailored uniform will be lint-free at all times, unwrinkled, and clean, things that are never expected of our working uniform, which is essentially just heavy-duty pajamas. They're a pain in the ass to keep clean, they're uncomfortable, and when you're wearing them you're under constant scrutiny. Needless to say, wearing your dress uniform doesn't increase morale, only blood pressure and the urge to drink. Come Monday, everyone shows up in their fancy, crisp, clean dress uniforms for an inspection. The inspection is carried out, people are told they don't fit into their uniforms anymore and need to get that figured out, gripes are made, and we're cut loose to work. All is well, for the majority of the squadron. See, most of the people I work with are your typical IT people, where they're at their desk for most of the day. Under those circumstances it is absolutely okay to wear a uniform that's more akin to a suit. But in my job, radio, we tend to get dirty. We climb towers, crawl under floors and above ceilings, and often find ourselves in situations that leave us pretty filthy. When we all realized that we were expected to do our work in a uniform that's expected to stay clean and is expensive to replace, we realized that there was going to be an issue. We put our heads together and tried to come up with a way to push all of our physical work off until the next day. No dice. As the disappointment set in, a coworker spoke up. Somewhere in the law-like regulations there was a line that mentioned that one cannot be made to do physical work in our dress uniforms. After some digging, we were armed with the following. Note, I can't remember if this was the subsection we cited, or if there was another. Regardless, this gets the point across. 1.2.1. Airmen will wear the appropriate Air Force uniform while performing military duties. So we sat following the regulations to the letter and using the time to knock out computer-based training and respond to emails. Eventually our section chief, individual who is in charge of multiple shops with similar functions, came down to relay that they were starting to get angry calls and to ask why we weren't working. After some explaining, they took it to our commander. I wasn't there for the conversation, but it was relayed back to us. Here's how it went. Section Chief S. Hey sir. I needed to send radio home to change. Commander C. Why? Everyone needs to be in blues today. S. Per AFI Air Force instruction, our regulations governing everything, they aren't able to perform their work in their blues. C. Why do they all have to be sent home? S. Because they were told they'd be in blues all day and didn't bring their normal uniform. C. How long is this going to take? S. 3 hours max. C. Why? S. A few of them live far away and they need ample time to change, and by the time they get back they'll be in their lunch block. C. Fine. Just tell them to hurry up. The good news was relayed to us, and we all hurried home and got out of our monkey suits and back into our comfy working uniforms, moseying on back just in time to take our lunches. I'm sure I'll catch flack from all of the Marines for that part. We found out that the angry calls had continued while we were gone, and the callers didn't feel much better being told the new lead time on their projects. After that, Blues Mondays were relegated to once a quarter, and it was stipulated that if your work was such that it couldn't be performed in your blues, you'd need to bring your utility uniform to change into after the inspection. We still didn't like the inspections, but it was much better than that flavor of morale boosting. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel and post some bear emojis in the comment.